It's well known by anthropologists that around 40,000 BCE, shamanism exploded around the world. This means that our ancestors had discovered techniques to experience the invisible spiritual dimension of reality. What we did not know until the 20th century, and I was not aware of until I was doing my research for Merchants of Light, is that there were very creative, heart-centered cultures that developed out of these spiritual experiences of our ancestors. And they came to be known as shaman, mystic, and in some cases, scientist cultures. Actually, not many people knew about that at all. And in some cases, no one knew until the 20th century how many cultures there were and how consistent they were. But they were repressed, and we didn't know that they existed until the 20th century. These cultures observed the laws of nature, both invisible and visible. Nothing was more important than understanding these laws and living in harmony with them. Mainline cultures, that is, our cultures, have lost this knowledge, and we no longer live in harmony with the laws of nature, and we can certainly see what the consequences of this are when we look around at a dying earth. But the indigenous people of the earth have maintained this ancient relationship with nature to this day. So we can say that our ancestors discovered these ways of living with nature, the laws of nature, and the indigenous people are those who have maintained them. Let's just look at a map here of where the indigenous people on the planet live. All of the colored sections are where the indigenous people are. And if you look at Europe and Central Asia, you can see that there's almost no indigenous people. And we have in the United States only 1.6 of the indigenous people of the world. There are 400 to 500 million indigenous people on the planet. You can contrast that with the population of the United States is 340 million. And so there are only 400 to 500. It looks as though there are more when you look at the map. And there are 5,000 different cultures, 90 countries. They form only 5% though of the global population. But this is so important. They sustain 80% of the Earth's biodiversity. In other words, that 80% is the life of the planet. Just a moment to talk about the doctrine of discovery. I did not know about this doctrine until I did the research for Merchants, and I've never met anyone, I believe, who knew about it. But this is what it is. The European Christian monarchs who supported the discovery and invasion and colonization of the Americas were supported in their genocide by what is called the doctrine of discovery or domination. And this doctrine was issued from the Vatican. There were several papal bulls from the Vatican beginning in 1493. The invaders were to take all the land, they were told, and possessions of the vanquished people. These people should be destroyed if they refused to join the superior race, quote, of the Christian conquerors. Supreme Court decisions still uphold this doctrine in this century, that all rights to the land belong to the United States. The original people only have the right of occupancy. And I had such a terrible time thinking about what was happening to the Native Americans when they were denied rights to their land and the pipelines went through and so on. And of course, this has happened consistently. And then when I read this doctrine, I realized that legally it isn't their land. I started out with, what's a worldview got to do with it? Well, it really has everything. The indigenous worldview, as I've already said, was our ancestors' worldview. Outer laws of nature and the inner laws of the human being are the same. Now that says a great deal to us about our own inner development. And how does that affect the outer development? Again, the indigenous worldview is the same as our ancestors, knowing the laws and living in harmony with them. They knew that that was necessary. They knew that the laws of nature and the organizing principles within the human psyche form the blueprint for our development and evolution. They knew there's a visible and invisible dimension of reality. We denied that. The visible dimension is matter, the invisible dimension is spirit. Matter and spirit are one. They knew from thousands of years ago that spirit, when it manifests in the physical world, it manifests as matter. They understood they are one. We, of course, have almost destroyed ourselves because we did not know that. The spirit dimension, what science today would call quantum field, is the source of our consciousness. It is consciousness. They understood and understand very well that consciousness is primary. It is consciousness that comes first. That creates matter. We are only now learning that through quantum physics. Everything is interrelated, interconnected, and this is what is incredible. Everything is in communication with every other aspect of itself, or at least it can be. And again, quantum physics knows that now. Our ancestors and indigenous peoples know that when we hurt nature, we hurt ourselves, because nature is our body. So the results of such a view, of course, are clear. We develop a relationship and respect and love for all life because we are part of it. We protect it. We know how to sustain it. We know how to relate and communicate. That is, if we have this worldview. Shamans very often, in altered states of consciousness, communicate with the trees, and the trees communicate with them and with other forms of life. Many of the indigenous people say that the white man does not know anything about their spiritual tradition. They learn it from the spirits. The spirits teach them what they need to know. Many of them don't read books, but they know what quantum physicists know. And of course, then we have co-creation rather than domination and control. We know about the organizing principles. And I think for us, it's so important to realize that what we do in the inner world affects the outer world. We've not known that. Indigenous people do. Well, let's look at the Western worldview. We know what it is. We've suffered from it. There is nothing but matter. We've been told this for over 300 years. And as I always say, it's not the scientist's fault. Before 1600, well, at 1600 really, scientists really began in earnest to discover the outer world, investigate and explore, as well as the inner world. But the Roman Church put a stop to that in about 20 years. And after that, these men, and men they were, scientists had to scatter. And when the Royal Society formed in England, they knew that they could not study the inner world of human consciousness, spirituality. And later, of course, they forgot that there was anything but matter. So here is our worldview for over 300 years. Everything is a fluke of nature in a random and meaningless universe. There's no meaning and no purpose. And when we're dead, and it's the end of everything we have ever loved. So can we be surprised that we're depressed and violent and all other types of experiences that are dangerous for ourselves and the world? I can't imagine a worldview being more dangerous than this one, because we've lost all interconnectedness. We demeaned dreaming and the visionary mind and the feeling mind. You know, I'm not interested in how you feel, just tell me the facts was a statement for so many years. And so many of these organs for feeling, dreaming, and having visions have atrophied because of the hundreds of years of demeaning them, making fun of them, calling everything out of that world hallucination, that we are not really able to do it as well as we could. There's been just a focus on rational thinking. And of course, we cannot know truth without the other dimensions of the mind working with the rational mind. We've lost respect for the self and the material world. Of course, for years, people have lived without meaning or purpose. Just a second, let me go back. where I was. One more. Yeah, here. Um, and we don't have the knowledge of how to co-create with other forms of life or how to sustain and protect them. Uh, and of course, we know this so well in the Western world that all of this very fatal type of worldview has resulted in emptiness, egotism, depression, addiction, hopelessness, fanaticism, violence, and of course, a dying earth. And many people today are very depressed and don't know what to do, how to heal themselves or the world. Well, we're beginning to realize that the indigenous worldview is our only hope for survival when we're working on the problems of the climate crisis. I don't think we'll ever be able to solve it until we realize that the origins of its death are within our human psyche. So we need to look and respect this ancient wisdom still carried by the indigenous people if we hope for the survival of the earth. Now, the Holy Grail, I've called it the corrective spiritual myth of our time. Again, it actually emerged in European consciousness in around 1300. It absolutely set Europe on fire. For 700 years, these ancient secrets or knowledge of the earth and ourselves had been repressed, and it re-emerged after 700 years of repression, and it expressed itself in, where am I, just a second? It expressed itself in this particular myth, and there are many, many stories, and you can see that each story is an attempt to help us to know how to heal, to break out of the depression and the rigidness that we had been imprisoned in. The myth really reflects the soul's awareness that the king in this myth and the land are one. He looks out at the land and he sees that it's a wasteland. And throughout the myth, he becomes aware that he and the land are one. This is a huge realization that what happens within his soul will be reflected in the land because we are one. Nature is our body. The inner world of soul is clearly reflected. And when we think about that today and look out at the world and we know what is happening, it really is a call of the soul for us to take the inner journey. And someone might say, well, I don't know how to take the inner journey. But what it is simply turning our vision inward to our own soul, and the sorrows or the longings, just follow those. And the psyche itself will lead us step by step in how to heal itself. I was thinking one night, I was up about 3 hours at night, just lying in bed thinking about this particular thing. And how do we know? How can we know that we can be of any help in healing the world? What can we do? Sometimes we feel so helpless and we don't know what to do. And I went into the kitchen to make some coffee, and I looked at the place where I have some books on cookbooks, and there was something kind of sticking out of it. And so I pulled it out, and when I read it, and I read this sentence, I thought, oh, that's why you wanted me to pick this up and read it. Changes at the level of the individual soul can generate the collective energy needed to change the condition of the world. And it was from the Orange County Jung Society advertising a talk by Michael Meade. I don't know him, didn't know him, but I think this is his thinking. But this is an absolutely beautiful and very, very important thing for us to know. We are not helpless. We have tremendous power to co-create with nature, to heal our own inner nature and outer nature. And this is so beautiful because the soul has the power of universal consciousness. And if we work together, even if we think we don't know what we're doing, but we have the intention to heal, then we are helping to generate the collective energy needed to heal the earth, to change the condition of the world. Here again is the map, but I want you to look at Africa. The blue arrow there is pointing at where a group of people live, the San Bushman, that I want to talk just a little bit about. That's a part of Namibia and Botswana. They used to be in all of the Kalahari Desert, but now they're reduced to very few people. They really are a dying culture. And the Western world looked at these Bushmen as just nobody, nothing. They even made fun of them. But they probably are the most ancient people on the planet. And they say, and I think that there's evidence to support what they say, is that they have been practicing rituals of a higher consciousness since 60,000 BCE. In other words, they are able to achieve Kundalini energy. Before there was the word Kundalini, they have quite another name for it, of course, but they have a ritual in which they dance and dance and dance, and they can finally shift consciousness into the cosmic dimensions of love and joy, light and consciousness and ecstasy. And this is something they practice to this day. And they even were able to form this energy into what they called arrows and throw them to someone so that it could hit them and ignite that energy in them. This is an amazing thing. And they would never think of doing these rituals alone, as so it often is in India, that you meditate alone and you can finally, after years and years, achieve the rising of that energy from the base of the spine and it unfolding in the full mind and experiencing cosmic consciousness. But they do it as a community. They dance together and they experience this consciousness together. When I read about them, I thought it was such a beautiful thing that they have a dance for everything. One of the dances is called the Little Hunger, and that is, of course, just for everything that we need on a daily basis to eat, water, and so on. And by the way, they don't live in one particular place and they have no possessions. They move around, and it's a very, very different way of life. But the other dance is called the Great Hunger, and that's the dance for meaning in life, for experiencing love and joy together. But they are a dying culture, as I said, a murdered culture. And I was horrified when several years ago I read that the South African government sold the last license to hunt the San people in 1936. And people who had settled there used their heads for trophies. They would kill them and then put their heads on a stick for a trophy. That's how little we thought of them. We thought they knew nothing and that we were the superior people. And all the while, these people were masters and still are, the ones who are, the shamans, Kundalini energy. We wouldn't know this because they most certainly, as many indigenous people, are not about to tell anthropologists who go in to study them who they are, what they are, or their spiritual experiences, because they know they wouldn't understand and they would make fun of them and dismiss them. But there was a person, Bradford Keeney, and later his wife. Bradford had a vision, a vision of just absolute love and joy, cosmic consciousness, and love just flowed through his heart all night and into the morning. And he just did not know what to do with it because our culture certainly didn't give him any way of understanding it. He went to MIT, and when he graduated, he became a professor in a university here. And then later, he was invited to South Africa to teach in a university. And 2 weeks before he was to leave, he had a dream. And that dream showed him a map. And he was told, when you get to South Africa, here is where you must go. And it was very, very clear exactly where he was to go. And when he went to South Africa and he was walking across the desert, he saw people running toward him. And it was the San Bushmen. And they said, oh, welcome, welcome. We have waited so long for you. Welcome home, actually, is what they said. Well, he has worked with them and his wife Hillary for over 20 years. and they release their spiritual knowledge to him. And it is a way of San Bushman as told by the tribal elders. It's very, very enlightening. And one of the major points I want to make is that the indigenous people know things that we never, ever could have imagined that they do know. Okay, the map again, the arrow there is way up in the Siera Mountains, high, high in the mountains. A group of people live there and have lived there since the Europeans came to South America. They had no contact with them, and the mountains were very, very hard for Europeans to get up there. But they began to see that younger brother, they call us, was damaging and destroying the earth. So they got in touch with Alan Herrera. There was a person who was part of their world and also who would go down into the world of Western culture. And so they did suggest that they get in touch with him. And so he wrote a book about them. Otherwise, we wouldn't know anything at all about them. But they realized that younger brother was doing so much damage to the earth that they felt they had to get in touch with us. What they do is that their shamans are trained for 9 years intensively. And then for some, there is a continuation of 9 more years. The ones who've done the double training live high up in the Sierras where no one goes except the shamans who are trained for 9 years. And they read no books, they have no books, and they say, we learn from Aluna. And what Alan Herrera realized is that they knew things that, again, our quantum physicists are just discovering. And the high shamans in the highest part of the Sierras have said that their job is to keep the balance of the earth, and they can no longer do that because of what we're doing to the planet. They want us to try to understand what happens when we ignore and disrupt the intelligent laws and the balance of nature. And these quotations that I have coming next, they so touched my heart when I read them, because they say to younger brother, thought is the scaffolding of matter, and without thought, nothing could exist. Now, they know that consciousness creates the universe. Consciousness is primary. So when matter is gone, consciousness is still there. But they are saying the way we're thinking is destroying the world. That we are dumbing the world down by the way we think. And we are therefore destroying both the physical structure and the thought underpinning existence. It's a very profound and troubling statement. But again, it's important to keep in mind that when Alan Herrera was with them and they talked to him, they knew things that some of the scientists said were on the cutting edge of quantum physics. It's just, I often think how we have looked at indigenous people because they look a certain way, they live in a certain way. Why? But there's a dreadful illness in the Western world, and that is a sense of superiority that we have always thought we're better than anybody else. And that is causing us some grave difficulties. Now, for the Native Americans, and you see the blue arrows in America, they have started a ritual that they ask all of us to join in, and they call it Healing Hearts at Wounded Knee. And they tell us about Wounded Knee, in case we didn't remember. On December 29th, 1890, 300 Lakota Sioux, men, women, children, babies, elders, were massacred by the United States 7th Cavalry. And so in memory of that, on the 100th anniversary, they formed a ritual of Healing Hearts at Wounded Knee. Their shamans and others took horseback and rode to Wounded Knee for the ritual. And their pledge for this is to invite all of us on December 29th to participate in our own way in meditation or thinking about the things that we want to bring into the world. And this is, they rode to Wounded Knee and did the ceremony there. We can do it in our own home, but they wanted us to think about and be aware of the worldwide human trauma and suffering that we have brought about by war and genocide, Holocaust, massacre, and racism. And we have to keep in mind that Indigenous people have suffered genocide all over the world. They want to end all forms of violence. And you know, we can certainly do that if we worked on getting to know the soul. We don't need to have a world of violence. Maria Gimbutas, who worked on old Europe, studied a civilization which lived in old Europe and prehistory, in which there was no war. There was absolutely no signs of war for thousands of years. They say we all have wounded knees and we all have wounded hearts. We're all in this together, and there can be no healing until we address the rage, the grief, and the deep suffering in our collective psyche and soul. And that, of course, is another call to tend to the soul. Now, the last is the arrow that is in the rainforest. And because of Janet, I tried to learn a little bit about the Yanomami and the very important things that all life within the rainforest is being critically threatened. I heard on KPFK one morning that Davi Kopanawa, a Yanomami shaman, along with 4 other people, all of whom are working to heal the earth, but he received the 2019 winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize, which I think Greta Thunberg was also won, trying to really focus on healing the trauma of the earth. He learned Portuguese. He's in the Brazilian part of the rainforest, and Portuguese is their language. So he learned that language so that he could travel to the world to communicate what's happening in the Amazon. He said he wants the world to know what people in the Amazon are experiencing, that they're being murdered and their lands are being destroyed by the Western world. So interesting, I saw him on video. He said, we don't want money. We do not want your money. We really don't want the things you have. What we want you to do is know that we have a right to this land, and tell other white people, as the language he used, that we are here. We know how to protect the land. We know how to keep it alive, and that we have a right to this land. We have been taking care of it for thousands and thousands of years. I also discovered that they have no health care, and that is important because white people are taking their diseases into the rainforest, and they have no cure for those diseases. Now, they have a president, I'm sure you all know, Jair Bolsonaro, who is very much against any indigenous person. I think he's just opened up the rainforest for any type of business. He says, this is a quotation from him, "It's a shame that the Brazilian cavalry hasn't been as efficient as the Americans who exterminated their Indians." And another time he said, "I don't want to hear anything about saving lands for the Indians." So he certainly has lost his heart consciousness, and they are suffering extremely from that, because they have now 20,000 armed gold miners just on Yanomami indigenous land in the rainforest, with large equipment, leaving mercury and silt in the rivers, destroying the forest and fish, and causing an increase of malaria from the stagnant pools of water left by these miners, as well as many other Western diseases. There's also mining for minerals, other types of minerals, logging and farming. And also Christian missionaries have gone into the rainforest, and of course they have brought the Western diseases, but they also took something else, which we often take when we go into indigenous lands. We take a sense of superiority. These Christian missionaries have no idea that the Yanomami talk to spirits in the forest. They have their own techniques for experiencing universal, sacred, spiritual consciousness. They assume they do not have, and that they must save them and have them believe in their own way of experiencing spirit. So this, to take a disrespect, you would have to say, which we've done all over the world, is already a type of disease that hurts others. But of course, we brought the Western diseases as well, physical diseases. Now, the Amazon is needed for the survival of the planet. If the Amazon goes, we go. It has its biodiversity, oxygen, fresh water, its ability to regulate and stabilize temperature and other climate patterns around the world. The world emits 40 billion tons of CO2 a year. The Amazon absorbs 3 billion tons of CO2 a year. But now, 1/5 of the forest is emitting more CO2 than it can absorb, and this is increasing daily. The land, the size of 40 football fields, disappear every minute. While I've been talking, they're disappearing. No, just a second. I have one more thing before. Yeah, this is it. Sorry, Janet. Indigenous people around the world, of course, are trying so hard to get us to listen. I mean, Davi himself said, I can't believe that you can't hear me when I say that what you do to the land, you do to yourself. And that we are all facing a planet that is dying. So it's a kind of an interesting thing that's happening now. In their desperate creativity to get us to hear them, they know, and they're trying to tell us very strange things are happening. Davi said, listen with your hearts. And Janet Mayer has listened, and she has heard them. And so we are going to hear from Janet now.
Okay, thank you very much, Betty. Betty will be back after Janet's talk to answer your questions. And by the way, if you have questions, you can type them in the question box and we'll get to as many as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I wanted to, before I get into how I know about the Indigenous tribe, the Yanomami, I wanted to first take you back a little bit so you understand where I'm coming from. When I was small, I was about 5 years old, I woke up one night, I saw my dad standing in the doorway and I could see through him. Now, it wouldn't be normal to see him in the doorway or my mom to check up on us before they went to bed, but I could actually see through him and I thought he was a ghost. So of course I started screaming and, you know, calling for my mom to come and get me. And as she walked through him, he disappeared. So from that moment on, I always thought of, you know, there were ghosts around us. And I always was kind of afraid. I liked to sleep with a light on, or, you know, I was really worried. And it kind of, I think, set my path right then. It let me know that there was something more going on than, you know, what anybody talked about, what anybody explained to us was as children. We didn't know about that we could see through people, that, you know, I knew nothing about that. And as I got older, I had more experiences here and there, but it wasn't until like my late teens, early 20s that I started seeing these visions that were really scary. I started seeing people passing. I saw accidents. I saw really, I don't want to say gory, but it was some gory things that would just pop in my vision. All of a sudden, I would just be going about my day, and the next minute I would have this vision and it would kind of stop me in my tracks and kind of freeze me. And I didn't know how to stop it. You know, there weren't any books. I was afraid to go to a doctor and say, hey, listen, this is happening. I was afraid they were going to try to put me on some medication. And I didn't want medication. I didn't think it had to do with anything like that. I felt like it was some kind of spiritual connection, but I didn't know how to stop that. So I felt like the best thing I could do is, you know, I heard about somebody doing regression work. So I went to a lady who did regression, and it didn't seem like it was really for me. So I really didn't know where to go next until my sister told me about a friend of hers who did this holotropic breath work. Now, I'd never heard of a holotropic breath work. You know, holotropic breath work is by Stanislav and Christina Groff, and it's a series of breathing and music that is supposed to access your subconscious, your superconscious, let you find out what you need to know, what's going on in your life. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. I'm going to try that. I mean, I just had so many horrible experiences. I was ready to do anything. I'm like, I'll try anything. And that's found it really kind of crazy, but just interesting enough that maybe this would do something. So my sister and I went to the first holotropic breathwork. We signed up and we get there and you take your blanket and you lay it out, and there's a morning session and there's an afternoon session. And my sister took the morning session, and I was supposed to be like her sitter, and you sit there and you kind of watch them or do whatever. I don't know what you were supposed to do, but I was there for her if she needed me for anything. And I sat there and the music started and the breathing started, and she was in her, zone. And I was just looking around and I was seeing people, kind of rolling over or, making noises and, some kind of curled up in a ball. And to be honest, I was kind of like, well, that's kind of weird. People are, they're probably faking it. I was kind of a little skeptical. I have to say I was really skeptical, but I thought, whatever, that's fine, whatever. So, the morning session's over, they have a break, you draw on a mandala, and you're supposed to, write your experience in this mandala that you're drawing. And after that, it was the afternoon session, and it was my turn. And, I had my blanket laid out and I lay down and I go in, I hear the music and the breathing, and I'm laying there and suddenly I start feeling like I'm in a cocoon, and I feel this energy of light and this energy of kind of a white and yellow energy of light circling around me. And it was really interesting because I kind of felt like I was lifted up a little bit and raised, and I just felt really, really comfortable. And I could hear people around me. I know there was a woman screaming, and it was like it didn't penetrate anything. I just laid there and listened, and I didn't move. And when I came out of it, my sister said, "Were you sleeping?" And I was like, "No." I'm like, "That was awesome. I don't know what just happened, but it was so awesome." I'm like, "We need to do this again. We need to do this again." And when I went in to draw my mandala, it was just like rays of light and yellows and oranges and whites. And it was so pretty and so relaxing. And I thought, something happened. I don't know what it was, but something just happened. And it was the coolest thing. And so we talked about it, and we both decided we had a really cool experience that we wanted to go back the following month. So we signed up again, and the following month we go, and my sister is first, of course, and we did it the same way where I wanted her to go first, and then we had the break, and then it was my turn. And, at the break time, you kind of, I get my blanket all ready, and, you can have like some tea or a couple little bites of something, and I just kind of did my thing while the morning people were doing their thing. And when it was time, I laid down on my blanket, and I was just laying there, and the music started, and the facilitator started doing the breathing exercise, and I smelled incense, and I was just so relaxed, and I could hear everything going on around me. And all of a sudden, I kind of heard this voice coming from the left side and getting closer and closer. And I heard it really close in my ear say, "Get up and go to the bathroom." And it was like I just spontaneously sat up, said, "I have to go to the bathroom." And my sister was looking at me, because you're not supposed to talk to anybody if they move around. You just kind of do whatever you need to help them. But I could tell she was looking at me like, "Are you 5? Did you not think about going to the bathroom beforehand?" But the problem is she didn't know somebody just spoke in my ear and told me to get up and go do that. So I walk across the hall, and I'm in there and I'm washing my hands, and I'm looking in the mirror thinking, somebody was talking to me. This is really crazy. Somebody was talking to me. And there was nobody next to me, in the breathwork group. So I knew it was coming from spirit right there. So I go back in, I lay down, and suddenly I start speaking another language. Narosarepela, Yanomoya, do Asemakanola, Esamon, Yat Ero Pasarietelo Masiriatala, Darieselo Masino Noracapasariela, Lomia Terapasaria Corina, Masapelo, Torokuyanamada, Takaloya the same. Sariamalo Papasaria Calamosa, Pasalamica, Saremeno Yasana, Atrepelemo, Manipa, Casarietelo. And it went on. And I spoke it for like an hour. And it just kept coming out. And while it was going on, I suddenly felt like I was to the side. And I could feel something coming up through my throat and out my tongue. And it just kept going. And I felt amazing. And I could see myself flying across the treetops, like the canopies. And they were beautiful green trees that I've never seen. And there was a beautiful sky. And I just kept speaking it and speaking it. And I thought, wow. And suddenly it was over. And it ended, and I opened my eyes, and there were about 5 or 6 people staring at me. And, you know, I had asked beforehand to my sister, don't watch me in case I did anything kind of weird. So that was really bizarre. So, you know, I didn't know what to do. You know, she helped me up right away, like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but, you know, let's go to the other room and have you draw your mandala. So I get into the other room. I sit down with this big piece of paper, and there's usually a circle on it, and you're supposed to draw within the mandala. And I just took green chalk, like the color of the trees, and I started making dashes all the way up and down, up and down, up and down across the whole paper. And I was like this when I got done. I was shaking so bad, I couldn't even hardly think. And we go back into the room where you're supposed to share, and I just looked at my sister. I'm like, we have to get out of here. I don't know what's going on. So we ended up leaving, and thank goodness she was driving. And we got home, and she dropped me off. And here I'm thinking, I'm going to tell my husband that this, you know, something came out of this. I'm not having these, you know, scary visions anymore. And instead, I'm going to have to tell him I'm speaking a language I don't know. Somebody's coming through me, through my voice, through my throat, and they're speaking a language. So, you know, we wait and we put our little son to bed. And in the evening, he's asking, how did it go? And I'm like, well, I started speaking a language. And he's like, okay. And I said, but I don't really know what I'm saying. I don't know what's going on. And he's like, okay. And that was kind of the end of it. Kind of gave me a hug, went to bed. The next morning, our day began. And it's halfway through the day, and he says, about that language, what were you talking about? And I said, well, you know, I said, I almost think I can speak it right now. And I closed my eyes. I said, I think I can speak it for a couple minutes. And I closed my eyes, and I just started speaking. Noro pepela, nonoma kasariatala, dorome, ama, azoruka, yoneme ete patata polisapono, manese pele, ozara kariodo kapatsosia da pasanimia, edeseri kalona, sedite poso de malaikarino kasari kelo, onema, anema sepe, doroka yadahakaxora, sadimehana. And then it stopped. And when I opened my eyes, he said, you were just speaking that for 2 minutes. He said, I just happened to look, it was exact 2 minutes. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And we were really both excited, and we thought, well, you know, I'm going to tell my family. This is really cool. So, you know, I start telling my family, and I wanted to tell one of my really great friends. And when I did, she said, oh my gosh, Janet, you're lost. I'll pray for you. You're lost. You're lost. And I thought, oh my gosh, really? You know me. Why would you think that? And I realized now it was her fears. And I understand that. I totally understand that. But it was really difficult because, you know, I thought everyone would support it because it was so cool. I mean, look what's happening. I had spirit coming through me. I'm speaking languages I don't even know. How awesome is that? And then I tell my in-laws, which you would think would be a little scary. My mother-in-law, she really enjoyed listening to it. But one of the relatives came over and heard that I was going to speak it. And she said, oh my gosh, don't speak it. I'm pregnant. I don't want anything to happen. I don't want anything to happen to my baby. Don't speak it. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what is wrong with these people? I'm just Janet. I'm normal. There's nothing else going on. And I realized in that moment that I had to get help. I had to find out what the language was. I mean, I couldn't have this go on. I knew it was something wonderful. It felt so good every time it came through. Of course, when I first started speaking it, it was very kind of guttural. It was slow, and I would rock. I would sit there and rock because it was so strong. It just took everything as it was coming out of me, as if it was using my energy to speak. And so I would just constantly rock. And I knew I needed to find an answer. I needed to find out someone who could tell me what it was. So I began on this journey, and I tried to contact, universities, churches, government agencies, anybody I could think of. I would send a cassette tape to, because yes, it was back in the 90s and we didn't have the computer like we do now with all the files. And I would just keep sending off tapes, and I would keep getting, no, we don't know what it is. It's not this. And I would compile a list of all these different languages that it wasn't, which isn't really that many when you think about how many languages are in our world. But I kept thinking, well, maybe it's not this area, maybe it's not that area. And I just kept going. And finally, one day I sent it to the Polynesian Culture Center in Hawaii. And there was a really nice woman there who said, I'll send it around to the islands. There's about 30 languages here, and we'll listen to it. And so I sent the cassette to her, and time goes by, of course. And she calls me back and says, it's not any of the 30 languages, Janet. She said, however, there is a woman a coworker who just returned from South America. And she thought it sounded like a South America language. And I was ecstatic. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the first time somebody might know what the language is. So I had just happened to get a magazine, the IONS magazine, Institute of Noetic Science, in the mail. And as I'm paging through it, there's a couple of people taking trips to South America. And I just started saying the names, and I'm like, well, I'm going to send the tape to one of them and maybe then the other. And I kept saying the name, and finally the name, it stuck out for me, and it was John Perkins. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to send it to him. So I emailed him and asked him if I could send him a tape, and he said, sure. And he called me back within a week and said, I know what you're speaking. I'm going to put you in touch with a man named Ipu Piara. I literally, I will never forget the day. I was sitting at our breakfast room table. I started crying. I was amazed that somebody finally knew what this language was after about 4 years. And he said he would put me in touch with the Ipu, and it took a number of months, but finally I get a call from Ipu Piara, and he is an advisor to the Smithsonian Institute, or he was, he's passed now. And he calls me and he says, Janet, honey, that's what he started calling me, Janet, honey, I have some questions for you. And I said, okay. He said, do you do drugs by chance? And I was like, no. And he's like, do you drink a lot of alcohol? And I'm like, no. I'm a social drinker. I'll have a drink once in a while, sure. And he goes, no, do you drink a lot? And I go, no. He's like, have you ever been in one of those facilities for people that might have issues? And I'm thinking, what's he talking about? I go, like a mental health place? And he goes, yeah. And I said, oh, no. I said, no, I'm just a normal mom. And he said, okay. He said, because you are speaking the languages, the Yanomami. And he said, speak it. And I'm like, and I just go on and on. And he's like, do you know what you're saying? And I said, no, that's why I need you. And he said, you're talking about the Yanomami people, and they were talking about being the fierce people or the white people. And when they pray, that's what they are called. And I said, okay, and I just was like, that's cool, I guess, and he said, I have to really listen to your tape and translate it. It's going to be a while. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I got to wait longer. I was going to go crazy. I thought I was going to know that day. And I'm like, okay. So we get off the phone, and months later, I get a call again. We set it up on, through email, and he calls me. And he always says, hi, Janet, honey. And I'm like, hi, Ipu Piara, how you doing? And he's like, call me Ipu. I'm like, okay, how you doing, Ipu? And he said, this is really interesting. He said, I know what you're going to be saying. Now think about this. I've been waiting years to find out what I've been saying. So I was so thrilled that I, had my pen and paper out, and I start writing, and he says, okay, are you ready? And I'm like, yes, I'm ready. And he says, the message is, we need to be more earth honoring people. Honor fire, water, air, and Mother Earth. That was it? Really? I'm sorry, but the language is coming through me. I thought it was going to be a message for me. And then I thought, what am I supposed to do with that message? And I said, okay. And he's like, are you writing it down? I'm like, yes. And he's like, they said this 23 times. I'm like, okay. And he said, and then it said, messages will be released. Honor, water, air, fire, and Mother Earth. And that was said 17 times. And he said, the interesting thing was, this was spoken in the male dialect. And I said, what do you mean? How would you know? What do they, and he said, well, there's a lot of words that were used that are taboo for the women to speak. And I was just, okay. And he said, send me another tape. So I sent him another cassette tape. And I hung up the phone, and, you know, there was a part of me, I was really disappointed. I thought, what? I thought that since it came through me, it was probably a message for me, right? I mean, why else are they going to come through me? And it took me a really long time to realize, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. This is for everyone on this planet. This is a message for everyone. We need to be more earth honoring people. And since then, from the 90s till now, look at how many things have happened to our planet. Look at how the oceans are filled with junk and garbage. I was just recently in Portland, and I saw these two sculptures and thought, oh, wow, those are awesome. Let's go look at them. And we run over there, and there's a big plaque, and it's talking about how these sculptures are made out of the junk, out of the plastic pulled out of the ocean. I mean, look at the straws. Do we need those? Look at all the things every day that we use. And I mean, I'll be honest, I wasn't one of those earth honoring people, you know, types that I did stuff all the time. I mean, sure, I tried to be careful, like, you know, most people, you kind of do different things, but all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do more. And I'm thinking also, you need to do more. We all need to do more. We need to be responsible. You know, we need to pay attention to what we do every day. I'm not saying you have to change everything in your life and in your world, but what I am saying is you need to start making changes. You know, I did. I had to. I mean, I'll be honest, I was using styrofoam plates when you had company or people over for a barbecue. I thought, why not? It's easy. You know, it's great. Let's do that. It's like, can't do that anymore. You know, there's so many things. It's like, is it really hard to wash a plate? Not really. You know, and I think that the message here is it's to tell us that they're still speaking through me. They still have a message, and they come through before major volcanoes. I'm not talking about a little one, but if there's a big one, if they come through. The first time it came through and I was shaking, I didn't know what was going on, and I kept hearing volcanoes, volcanoes, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And I realized the earth was changing. It was in New Zealand when one, you know, there was one erupted. And then I started having it when there were earthquakes. My bed would shake, or there would be other things that all of a sudden I'd wake up and I'd be like 5.8, and I'd be thinking 5.8. Why am I thinking 5.8? What's that mean? I'm like, it's an earthquake. And it would always keep going, and it still is going to this day, as if they're coming through me. Think about it. I have spirits out there that are working through me, speaking through me, telling all of us on the planet, we need to be more earth honoring people. How are you going to do that? You have to start on your own. I can't tell you everything you need to do. You have to figure that out on your own with what you want to do personally to help. And that is a huge message that I have to tell you that's very urgent, because they keep coming through. And they come through, and I keep waking up and I'm like, oh my gosh, now what? They're coming through, they're speaking. Narosere, narasaria polo sema, nanakalia tarapasono, isarakala, karabombesteria, nemeste, dorosariana, demia tarapasatokela, kariapolo masipelea torapasanemiala, azorietelo musikananyandata. They're telling us to pay attention, but they're also giving me another message for all of you, that we are all psychic. We all have that ability. Our souls know so much more than what we were taught. We all have an ability. Some are better than others. You know, some people end up being mediums, some aren't. But everyone's psychic, and everyone can continue to do that with their soul, to work on their soul progress. You can read books, you can meditate, take a hike, listen to music, dance, whatever brings you, you know, that energy and stirs it up and gets it going for you. And I think that's really an important message that you have to remember as well, that we have both of these messages are super important, okay? And that's basically my story. So I want to end up with something by saying, you know, that I have this little quote that I always read: not doing more than the average is what keeps the average down. And I always remember that because it always tells me to do more. Remind yourself to do more. And so I would just like to end with them saying a blessing to you, because I still feel it on my tongue. And I want you to listen to it and see if you actually feel something from it. You know, just pay attention and open up and see if anything comes to you as I'm speaking this. Nedo sarepala nana itaro donamasapele kian. Yastete toropayeno mahian. Mahianana fokasaya topepino sarepele no mahian. Esorietara mohoya. Darasia pele moya na kisirada. Dariaselo mokisinema. Barisopele kieno. Isantepelo darasaya nomienta que soria palame itaso. Paso pebene seria te comiano moso aso. Osa tene on asakan on the sodopira. Gariamoto pasepelodo. Misen potokayana sepe. So thank you very much. I basically would just like to say that if everyone just starts paying attention to what they're doing, whether it's, you know, in a spiritual vein so that they can go deeper within, or if it's on an everyday level where you're doing something day to day, that you may be able to change a little bit or tweak something to help our planet, that would be a really positive thing that I would love that would come out of this, you know, webinar, is if everyone can just start little and, you know, look around. What can you help with? What can you do? Whether it's for our planet and for your own soul, I think your growth, your own soul's growth, that would be a great way to end the webinar for me, besides saying thank you to Forever Family Foundation and to Betty, who I love. So, go ahead, Betty.
Well, I think the more we know about our world, the more we're open to it. I was absolutely amazed to see that there had been these profound shaman mystic traditions that had continued, and the Deuteronomist in Judaism and the Roman Church in Christianity squelched them, destroyed them in every way they possibly could. And they also programmed us, our whole culture, in a way of believing in a doctrine rather than going inward and allowing the Spirit to reveal the sacred doctrine within us. And for me, it's helped me to have that history. When I taught fairy tale and myth, and I saw how incredibly brilliant the human psyche is, that this knowledge was told in stories for thousands of years. That's how they kept this shaman mystic knowledge. We didn't know that that's what it was that brilliant. For me, it's been knowing how incredibly wise that the indigenous people are, how incredibly wise our ancestors were. And I certainly was taught that they weren't. They were, you know, cave people. and that was misunderstanding the cave people for sure, because they were experiencing altered states of consciousness. It wasn't what we had thought. So our whole method of teaching has been upside down, inverted. And I think knowing that kind of frees us to, as you say, Janet, to pay attention and let our own inner wisdom and intelligence guide us. Jude Currivan, quantum physicist, said, we do not have consciousness. We are universal consciousness. We haven't been taught that. That's been denied us, that knowledge. But if we really begin to honor the greatness and the power of the human being, of the soul, the heart, the mind, if we can just begin to see in a different way, in a more honoring way of the earth, of ourselves, I think a lot can happen. It is waiting for us. It's just like the San Bushman had said, oh, welcome home. We've been waiting so long for you. And I think that the heart is waiting for us. It is the most powerful brain component that we have. And it connects us to spirit.